Good day, this is Joe Van Cleve, and I am an office supply junkie. And today, I present you the Rolodex. Back in the day of the paper office and the pre-computer era, the Rolodex file was ubiquitous. Every office, it seemed, had these things. And what these are is essentially, they function as a filing box, if you will, and it has tabs typically like this one, organized alphabetically. But it's a circular file box. It rotates, hence the term Rolodex. And each individual card is hole punched with a special hole system, and the cards can be taken out and put back in a random access order. So it is a file box system for organizing things, but it has some distinctions from a normal file box. Now, a lot of the functions of the Rolodex these days have been replaced by just mailing lists, email lists, and your contacts in your email application and your smartphone. So it seems like the idea of a Rolodex is probably gone to the wayside. It's obsolete, irrelevant in this day and age. But I'm going to present to you guys an idea for revisiting the Rolodex and in this 21st century, and maybe there's some new applications that we can discover for it. So I recently purchased this Rolodex off of a seller on Amazon, actually Amazon itself selling it. It was a fairly reasonable price. I can't remember what I paid, probably under $20, and with Amazon Prime I got free shipping. But it came with this blue alphabetical tab system, and it came with the paper already preloaded, these pre-punched white little sheets. But they also sell packs of blank cards pre-punched, and you can refill your Rolodex and put new cards in them. And one of the things I was thinking about for this Rolodex is whatever I'm going to be doing with it, I would like to be able to punch my own holes, because I'm thinking about using different colored sheets of paper, and also about being able to take cards and small sheets of paper from other paper systems and being able to punch them and then stick them in this rolling file, if you will. So what you need is a Rolodex punch. And if you go to your big box office supply retailer, most of them you'll find they don't carry Rolodex punches. And if you go to most craft stores, you have a hard time finding them. I spent several hours last week looking around both Michael's and Hobby Lobby in my town for any kind of Rolodex compatible punch, and I couldn't find one. So I ended up ordering one off of Amazon, and this one ended up being probably almost the same amount of money as this. There is a seller on Amazon that's selling an official Rolodex punch for like over $100. This one is under $20. And this one is the Heidi Swap, some kind of a crafting brand, and it's plastic. And so these cards that are used in this Rolodex system are 4 inches wide, and they're approximately 2 1/4. They say 2 1/4 inches tall. They're really somewhere more like 2 1/8 or 2 3/16. And so what I decided is I wanted to, with this punch, be able to make my own cards. And so I took a standard size sheet of 8.5 by 11 inch letter paper, standard US size, and by cutting off a 1/2 inch strip off the long side, then I could cut that into 2 4 inch wide strips and then cut those into these small pieces. I had to cut these about 2 3/16 inches tall in order to get, what do I have, 8 or 10 of these? 3, 4, 5, 10 sheets, 10 cards per sheet of paper. So there are 2 lines, little reference lines on the punch, and of course you stick the paper in there and line it up, and boom, a little bit of dramatic spring-loaded action there. Well, this Rolodex punch will actually punch 2 sheets of thin printer paper, copy paper, at a time. I don't think I'd want to do more than 2 at a time. It also has a little grippy, kind of a silicone rubber feet on the bottom, but of course on this carpeted surface it's going to slip. But on a hard desk surface, this thing grips pretty good and doesn't fly around too bad. But it's a pretty good size spring, and there's a clear compartment on the back where you simply open it up and you can dump out all the chads. So it's easy to clean. Anyways, so yeah, it does a pretty good job punching. Now, let's talk about the compatibility between this punch and the actual Rolodex cards that come with this Rolodex system. So to your right is the official Rolodex card, and to the left is the aftermarket Rolodex punch. And the hole size is slightly different. The aftermarket punch, the holes are slightly smaller. They're not as wide. And the slots that go in from the edge are not as deep on the aftermarket punch. However, despite those differences, it looks to me like it actually works just fine. You can put this card in and it works just fine, and it's not going to be a problem. You might notice also on the pre-manufactured cards that they've chamfered the corners a little bit, rounded them to make them look nice, and so they won't get dog-eared. And you can do the same thing by going to your craft store and buying a corner punch. So you simply punch the 2 corners, and now you have yourself a pre-made or homemade Rolodex card that you can stick into your Rolodex file, and you don't have to keep buying the refill paper. And also, this opens up the possibility for using different colored pieces of paper for your filing system. And let's explore, why would you want to use different colored pieces of paper? Well, I have an idea. So back in their heyday, the Rolodex was originally intended as a filing system for things like addresses and phone numbers and contacts. But since the post-paper office era, the post-Rolodex era, if you will, a lot of crafty and artist-type people have come up with alternative ways of using Rolodexes. And if you go to places like Pinterest and other websites where there's a lot of creative people, you'll see all kinds of interesting uses for Rolodexes besides addresses and contacts. For instance, people are putting homemade note cards and artwork into them, and they're using the Rolodex as a kind of a gallery or a photo album. You can take those Instax wide, Fuji Instax wide prints, and you can Rolodex punch them and stick them right in your Rolodex. But I first heard about these alternative uses for Rolodexes from an artist named Austin Kleon. And he had an article dated April 27th, 2017 in his blog called The Rolodex Project. And what he says here is, last year I bought an old Rolodex with the original cards in it for $2 at Goodwill. I wasn't sure what to do with it. Then I came up with the idea of listing my favorite artists and telling my kids about them. I leave it on my desk, and whenever I have some extra time, I pull out and add a few entries. And so he gives it examples of Jonathan Demme and Linda Berry and Kate Bush, Corita Kent, Frank O'Hara, Arthur Russell, Wayne White, etc., Bobby Womack. Anyways, he just puts out little notes about each artist. He puts them out on a Rolodex card, and I think it's really cool, creative idea, an alternative idea. And so I was, that's what kind of inspired me to go off and buy a Rolodex, a brand new Rolodex, was the idea that there are some alternative and creative ways of using these besides just for addresses and phone numbers. One of the first and obvious uses for Rolodex is actually for addresses and contacts, and in this era, email addresses. But I think where it comes into play, and I've kind of reinforced this idea repeatedly in this video series, is the idea of using paper, legacy technologies like paper, as an adjunct or a backup system for digital systems. And I think it's possible that we could use a Rolodex system like this as a master backup system that has several attributes to it. First of all, it's relatively secure. So just a few years ago, Edward Snowden, a former contractor to the National Security Agency, revealed a whole trove of documents pertaining to how government intelligence agencies are able to own the internet. And essentially, you can't guarantee anything is secure and private anymore. And it's not just from governments, but it's from malicious hackers as well. So one of the advantages that a Rolodex system has is whatever kind of data that you can record on these cards, you can guarantee can be pretty darn secure, because it takes everything back to the common denominator of old-fashioned physical tradecraft in order for this data to be compromised. The second thing about a paper system is that it is relatively robust. If you used acid-free paper and used a very robust writing system such as graphite pencil, or let's say even black and white laser printing, which uses carbon-based toner, those kinds of writing technologies are extremely stable for hundreds of years because they use carbon. And so a low acid paper with a high carbon content writing type of line is going to be extremely durable and robust for hundreds of years. So I have floppy disks from the 1990s. I don't have a floppy disk player, a drive to read them with, and even if I did, it's questionable whether there's any data left on those to be retrieved. And this brings about the point about magnetic media in general. Magnetic media is intrinsically not archival because quantum mechanics dictates that those magnetic domains will randomize themselves over time, even if you treat them as good as you possibly can. So magnetic media has to be periodically copied to new media. Read-write CD-ROMs or DVD-ROMs is really an optical technology, and as such it's light sensitive, and you don't want to leave those in sunlight. And flash memory is intrinsically also not archival because the floating gate in a flash memory transistor cell, the electrons are stored in a floating gate, and by quantum mechanics they will leak out over time. And also the way that you erase a flash memory cell using an avalanche type of voltage to jump electrons over the barrier results in, down at the molecular and atomic level, damage to the insulation. And you can only read, write, erase, and reread, rewrite so many times on a flash memory before it's no longer functional. So there are some intrinsic technological limitations to the current state of digital memory systems, which comes back to the advantages of, for written material, certainly, of an old-fashioned Rolodex system, if nothing else, as a backup for your data, a hard paper backup. What I envision doing with this Rolodex system is several things simultaneously. One of the things I want to do, of course, is put all my contact information, email addresses, phone numbers, mailing addresses in here alphabetically. And I'm going to use a color coding system, color coding the paper. So because this Rolodex file came preloaded with white paper, I'm going to be using the preloaded white paper probably for email addresses and phone numbers of people, contact information. But I am also going to be using other colors of paper, punching my own cards and putting them in here for different applications. One of the possible applications that I could do is I could also have my favorite websites. So if you guys use multiple platforms for surfing the internet, tablet, phone, laptop computer, desktop computer, maybe all of those, you'll find that you can't easily share all of your favorite contacts between all those platforms and all those different browsers. You can't easily get to all of them. all of those contacts. So for instance, the favorites that I use in my iPod, I don't have all those favorites in my laptop because I can't easily share one to the other without manually typing them in. So this might be a simple backup system for whenever I find a new website I like. Yeah, I'll put it in the browser of whatever tablet or computer I'm using, but also I might enter that website address on my card system, and I might use a color like green or something, lime green maybe, as an example, for putting that in the archiving system. So, for instance, the Analog Photography Users Group, apug.org, I would just file it under A, right? And there would be a green card in here where it has apug's address. Let's say under L's, L for Large Format Photography Discussion Forum, I'll put their website address there. So all of my favorite website addresses I'm going to have in its own color-coded card system on in this file box. So I'm doing multiple things with this at once. There's another thing that you can do with these filing systems, and that is favorite recipes even, and think cooking related. Well, you could use one of these as not only for addresses and phone numbers and contact information, and not only for website addresses, but you could also use it for recipes. And you could either file all your recipes under R for recipe, or you could file them by what kind of a dish it is, like casseroles are filed under C or whatever. And again, you could use a different colored card for recipes, maybe orange or whatever, right? So if you come under one of these tabs and under the O tab and you find an orange card, that's going to be like omelets or something. If you find a green card, that might be a website address beginning with O. If it's a white card, it'll probably be a phone number or contact person. So again, there's multiple systems that you could be putting into place simultaneously into a Rolodex. Now, one of the other uses for a Rolodex file I thought would be really interesting would be to use it for collecting those random bits of information that writers like to collect in the process of researching a new work. And what I'm talking about is you might come up with a name of a character, or you might come up with a short little vignette, a paragraph that you want to preserve that. Well, you could write those on cards or little slips of paper, maybe a certain color like light blue or something, or pink, and stick it in your Rolodex file alphabetically. Maybe you might be able to even create your own tab, get some cardstock and cut it out with a tab, hole punch it, and start a whole tab just for a writing project, and just put your raw ideas for vignettes, names, imaginary towns, character profiles, or whatever. Put them in the Rolodex under the tab for that project. So that becomes a creative management tool for managing your writing and your creative projects this way. And it's being used in parallel with your addresses and your emails and your recipes and all the other things that you can do with a card catalog kind of a system. Well, these are my thoughts about having a Rolodex and finding new usage modes and new usage models for the Rolodex file system. I hope this gives you guys some ideas for how useful a Rolodex might be in the post-paper office digital world that we live in. I think there is a valid place for this, and hope this gives you guys some creative ideas for what to do with a Rolodex. And until next time, this is Joe Van Cleve, and I am an office supply junkie.